We live in a fantasy world now. Reality has been destroyed.
This is the time that you really need to pay attention.
The probabilities are overwhelmingly on gold's side. That is the best environment to see gold increase its value.
Welcome to Palisade's Gold Radio. I'm your host, Tom Bodrovics. Joining me today is Chris Irons, host of the Quoth the Raven podcast and author of QTR's Fringe Finance Substack. Chris, how are you today? Thanks for joining me by video today.
I know. How about this, man? No wind. I'm not going to be out pacing around talking to you like I usually am. I'm speaking in a good microphone today. So the only problem is I don't have anything coherent to say. So it's going to be high quality, awful thoughts.
High quality off the cuff. Well, there is scientific studies that have proven that thinking and really, let's say, chewing on ideas while walking is very beneficial. And you can come up with interesting ideas and make some more profound connections, if you will, while walking. But
I believe that. And I like to walk. I walk all the time, all day, every day. I average like 20 to 30,000 steps a day between running and walking. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I just like, if I'm going to be talking, I like to be burning calories also too. So I can tack one more beer onto the end of the night and not gain 12 pounds a week.
Yeah. So Chris, you've had the pleasure of interviewing some very high level people in the last 6 months for your podcast. And, I listened to a good majority of everything that you put out. And, being in somewhat of the same position, I found myself wondering if there's any particular theme or sentiment that you came away with from the collective sum of these conversations.
Well, that is a great question. I think my three interviews that you're probably talking about are I interviewed Michael Saylor, I interviewed RFK Jr., and I interviewed Matt Taibbi, all within like 2 weeks of each other. And unless you're talking about me and Mark Spiegel bitching at each other for the 100th time in the last 2 years, but I don't think that's what you're referring to. I think with the sentiment, the overlap in the Venn diagram between those three people, that's a great question, is definitely that the economy is broken. I think, they would probably argue, although, RFK and Saylor are obviously, pro Bitcoin. I don't know what Matt Taibbi's stance on Bitcoin was. Certainly, I think all three of them think the system as it exists today is deeply flawed, probably from more than an economic standpoint. But I think if we just start with economics, that would be the common ground between all three of those guests and the host, believe it or not.
So when we're thinking about that, though, like, it seems like there is a recognition by, pretty much everybody that something is broken, or there are many things that are broken. And yet somehow the system is just continuing on here. So, like, how do we square that with this understanding that basically everybody agrees that everything is broken and that something needs to basically get wrecked in order to change this system?
I don't think that there's anything that we can do. I mean, short of, Larry Lepard always says, the one thing that could kill my fund is if the government decides to all of a sudden be responsible with monetary policy and fiscal policy. And we both know that's not going to happen. So that's out. I don't see either party, no matter who wins the election in November, walking into the White House and saying we need to fundamentally change the way that we think about economics and finance. And short of that, it's just sit around and wait for something to break. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't want to sound flippant, but that seems to be the direction we're heading. I just interviewed James Lavish this weekend. It's on my Substack. I did a great interview with him where basically he explains the entire debt crisis in an hour and 15 minutes. And I asked him, what's the end all be all? And he's like, there is none. Like, they're going to have to go back to negative rates. And then that's it. And then somebody calls our bluff on treasuries or on the dollar. And that's it. So I think short of man, it would have to be like several thousand steps we would have to take to write this, with the first step being at least talking about it, talking about some semblance of fiscal responsibility. Cutting spending, I've been saying, would be like the first thing. If both parties came to a consensus that, like, hey, we're going to have to address the issue of cutting spending. You know how these things work, Tom. They talk about them and then 5 years later they happen. But at least somebody saying that and telegraphing it, that would be a start. Mm-hmm. We haven't even done that. And so every day that we don't do that, we're 5 years further away from making any meaningful changes. And it really just doesn't seem like there's a right answer here. Zero Hedge just posted, let me read you this tweet I retweeted yesterday from Zero Hedge. They said that in 2025, spending on U.S. interest at 3.4% of GDP will surpass the budget deficit on everything else, which is 3.1% of GDP, and it'll never shrink again. That's the end, right? I mean, that's the snowball rolling down the hill, and it doesn't slow up on its own and just stop. It's why it's a snowball. It gets bigger and it picks up speed. Mm-hmm. So I think the better question is, how long is it going to take before something breaks permanently? And then what are these boneheads going to try to engineer and pass off as a solution? Mm-hmm. I listened to Andy Schectman, a mutual friend of both of ours, on Kitco last week. And he did a wonderful job, as usual, articulating basically the bifurcation of the global economy as it's happening here between the West and BRICS, hereinafter referred to as people playing in the financial Ponzi scheme and people that are like waiting for the music to stop. And I listened to him, and, he made wonderful sense. The question is just, when is it going to happen? Because he's been saying the same thing for 2-3 years now, at least since I've been following him, probably a little bit longer than that. I first heard him on Palisades probably 5 years ago. And you'll have all these idiots that'll tell you, well, the broken clock is right twice a day. And, if you can't figure out timing, you can't figure out anything. And so it's like, what's the point of all this lip service when it's not going to make a difference to the stock market today, tomorrow, next week, or the month after? But that doesn't mean that he's not right, because he is. And so it will happen when we least expect it, I think. And the catalyst could be something completely innocuous, which, as Mr. Lavish said to me, that's why they call it a black swan. But yeah, we're in a really tough spot, because my guess is what's going to happen is that something will break, and it'll become clear that if the Fed doesn't act, we're going to descend into a deflationary depression. Essentially, there's so much leverage out there, and there's so much debt, and people are so broke that it's going to be a fire sale across all asset classes. And the Fed's going to have no choice. They'll either have the choice of sitting back and waiting for a depression to unfold, or to print money. And they'll do the latter, and it'll be 10 or 15 trillion this time, and it's going to be the end. I mean, we've been saying this since QE2, QE3. The next one's going to be the big one. The next one's going to be the end. We continue to keep getting away with it, but don't let that cloud your judgment into thinking that it's going to work forever, because it sure as hell isn't. It really hasn't been very long at all, Tom, has it? It's been about, 50 years we've been off the gold standard. That's nothing. That's, it's half a century. Mm-hmm. It's nothing at all. And so do we have another 25 years left? 25 might be pushing it, if you ask me.
And again, if we use history as a guide, typically, empires last for around 100 years. And we're really getting on the high end of that. But, you mentioned this idea of a black swan. And if we kind of, again, like sit back and think about these things from a more, let's say, a more informed view, I don't think calling it a black swan is necessarily, the right way to look at it. I think this is more like a big gray rhino that you can see coming. That's not necessarily, super slow moving or anything like that. But, this is something that anybody with half a brain and a calculator can figure out, right? This is math.
And we said this. I think almost verbatim, probably the last time we talked. I think I remember you saying that. It's not a black swan. It's a big, and so when people ask, like, well, where are the end stage, end of empire stage, clues? All right. Well, how's spending $320 million on a pier in the middle of Gaza that lasts 12 days and then washes out to sea because the people that put it together didn't engineer it to withstand waves of 3 feet, which are the average size waves year round in the area that they were going to place it. 320 million gone like that, excruciating. We are paying excruciating attention to people's tax receipts, people that make over $600 on Venmo and all this other bullshit. We are paying excruciating attention to that. Now juxtapose that with how carelessly we're spending. $1 trillion comes up missing at the Pentagon, no big deal. $100 billion unaudited to Ukraine, no big deal. And so those are the signs. The signs are right here. We have, look, I'm a libertarian. I don't care how you want to live your life socially. I'm stoked for whatever gets you off, gay, lesbian, straight, trans, men, women, race, religion, color, creed. I support it all. But, these pride parades with the, guys and the assless chaps parading around in front of children and drag queen story hour. And it's just like decadence. It just seems like we've lost control. It seems like the nation has just lost in just the West. This is the whole West, the immigrants pouring over the border, 100% for immigration. I am 100%. You live in Canada. You know what the immigration system's like in Canada. It's fucking impossible almost to get into Canada. Canada has a legit.
Not now.
No. Well, how come I couldn't fucking?
It's become far more liberal now.
Well, let me tell you, I had bank statements and I had an acceptance letter and I had this and that and the other, and I still couldn't get a friggin' student visa to get to Canada a while back. It was impossible. It felt like it was impossible to do. The system was like antiquated, and like I had to go pass through all these tests, and because it was in Quebec, I needed to speak French, and it was, oh my God. But anyways, 6 million people pouring over the border. The state of California has just the cities, dude, are in huge trouble. I live in a city. I would go back and forth to New York, Philadelphia. Cities are just a nightmare. It just feels like we've lost control. And I think that this election is just going to be a referendum on that. And, there's a lot of things about Donald Trump I don't like, but I think from a policy perspective, if he does not get elected, this country is in enormous trouble. I mean, the DOJ going after him, 94 counts of fraud. They're going after him over $110,000 NDA he signed 10 years ago that, isn't federal, is past the statute of limitations and was 100% legal. Even Judge Judy was on TV the other day on CNN. She called it nonsense. Andrew Cuomo was just on Bill Maher. He said they should have never went after him. So this is like late stage empire stuff. And I got to tell you, man, between that and fucking artificial intelligence, I can't say that I'm completely disappointed that I'm not going to be around in 50 years because I don't really want to see how this ends up. I was never one of these like, good versus evil kind of guys. Kind of all thought that was bullshit, not like super religious guy, but like it really does feel like there are dark forces at work. And I can't tell if it's because I'm getting older and, my world is getting smaller and the things that are important to me I see with more clarity, my law and order, the safety of my family, my friends, my community, the people around me. Those have really become the priorities in my life. And so I don't know if it's due to a change of priority, but it feels like we're just heading in the wrong direction. I'm wearing my IDF t-shirt today because, for a couple of reasons. One is because I was just watching on Twitter yesterday, this crowd of people beating the shit out of a woman in New York for being Jewish. And I'm like, I can't tell you how many things I watch on Twitter. And I'm like, it's not always that bad. When I get out and I walk around my city, 999 out of 1,000 interactions I have are fine. So you know that you're seeing the worst of things. But on the other hand, it is that bad. Like, there's no context that you can put that in where that's going to make sense to me, at least. And I just think, like, I got all these 20-year-old dorks lined up at 9th and Market with Hamas flags. Hamas, not we're rooting for peace. The flags aren't, we want peace in the world. That's a statement. Okay, I can get behind that. Who doesn't want peace in the world? We're calling for an end to war. There's nothing wrong with that. Ron Paul, one of my favorite guys in history, anti-war. War is hell, man. Nobody likes war. 1,000 out of 1,000 people have given the choice, except for maybe, fucking Nikki Haley and Lindsey Graham. 1,000 out of 1,000, and most of the Democrats right now, apparently. 1,000 out of 1,000 people that you ask them if they want war, they're going to say no. Nobody wants war, man. Nobody wants it in Ukraine. Nobody wants it in the Middle East. Nobody wants it here at home. That's one thing, man. But how much of a mental pretzel do you have to twist yourself in to be out there waving a flag for Hamas? That would be like standing. We're in the middle of goddamn Philadelphia, William Penn, Benjamin Franklin, Philly, Liberty Bell, Declaration of Independence. And look, they say if you support free speech, you got to support the speech that you dislike the most, and that's fine. I subscribe to that, but it just doesn't make sense to me. I support their right to do it, but doesn't make a whole hell of a lot of sense to me. And that's why I'm wearing my shirt today, because when I walk into my fucking local coffee shop here, I get a lot of goofy looks from people. You get all these like 19-year-old art students making faces at me like they're passing a kidney stone the size of a goddamn volleyball. And personally, I enjoy that. So I feel like we have to I don't know. Feel like it's a good time to speak up also. I don't know, man. Late stage empire stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting that you bring up this idea that the Democrats are in some ways almost the ones championing for war, which is a mega contrast to what the Democrats used to stand for, right?
Well, they're certainly championing it in Ukraine. Not so much in the Middle East, and that's because their side fucked up and is now bearing the consequences of their actions. Nobody wants to see civilians killed, ever, myself included. But on the other hand, being deniers over what happened on October 7th is I don't know, man. People's critical thinking has just become so damaged. It's a product of the universities. Another guy they just found yesterday, Jamal Bowman, this fucking genius. I was just watching videos of his re-election campaign that he had in the Bronx yesterday. He's jumping around and screaming and hooting and hollering and carrying on. It's like me on a podcast. But I'm not running for Congress. But that's one thing. It doesn't make sense to me. I don't understand. It's almost like they're taking the position. I really don't know. But then with the Ukraine war, it's like, it really does seem like another fruitless kind of enterprise. I understand that if you support Ukraine and you think that Russia's the bad guy here, because look, let's put everything aside, put aside the NATO stuff, right? And the expansion of NATO stuff that to many people justifies part of this. But let's put that aside and let's just look at the facts. Russia instigated a hot war with Ukraine, and those are facts. They went in, they invaded, they started it. Fine. It's one thing to speak out against that. It's another to purposely prolong a war that Ukraine just simply doesn't have a chance of winning unless the West brings troops to Ukraine and gets more involved. And then you're really getting into dangerous territory, because then you're talking about a hot war between larger Western powers. We have to remember, Ukraine is not a NATO member as it stands. And the idea that we can just fund them in perpetuity to fund this war is just it just defies common sense and logic on how to compromise in an effective way to end the war. And, the realistic situation is Ukraine's not going to get everything they want. I mean, unless we wind up putting troops on the ground, which we shouldn't do. That's obviously an escalation.
Mm-hmm.
But the Democrats, not unlike people are with modern monetary theory, seem to think that the solution of kicking the can down the road and just prolonging it for another day is some type of solution, when really, in fact, what it's doing is bankrupting the United States. If we were a creditor nation and we had a $34 trillion check in the bank instead of a $34 trillion hole in our balance sheet, and we had a surplus of $2 billion a year instead of a deficit of $2 billion a year, that would be one thing. Then it'd be like, all right, maybe we can fund them to like some type of perpetuity until, the Russian war machine tires out. But who the hell are we to be offering up $100 billion in aid? We just don't have it, So it's not a pragmatic way to address the problem. And at the same time, we're hurting ourselves. So this kind of stuff just makes no sense to me at all. This seems to me to be as careless as we can get. We're waving the flags of the terrorists. We're funding and prolonging a war where our side really has no meaningful chance of winning. And we're doing so from a position of a $2 trillion deficit with $34 trillion in debt. We're paying $1 trillion a year in interest on the national debt. I don't know. We have 210 out of 365 days of the year or some type of like LGBTQ awareness days. Hey, that's fine, man. LGBTQ, love you guys. Got a lot of gay friends. Have trans friends. Love them. But we have lost the plot here somewhere along the way. We've lost the plot. And so, again, I don't know if I'm getting old, but to me, it seems very difficult to find a way in which all this stuff eventually makes sense.
Well, it's interesting. I was thinking about much of the same.
This is not a very optimistic statement there. Sorry.
Well, but I think there's a difference between being optimistic and recognizing reality for what it is, right?
Right.
And we're not going to be able to do a proper analysis or solve any of these problems just by being optimistic. We have to recognize it for what it is. But where I was going was, thinking about all of these debt issues as I was preparing for our conversation today, Chris, I kind of came to the idea that really we're just stealing, let's say, happiness or prosperity from tomorrow. And not only from tomorrow, but also from future generations.
For sure.
It just, there's no way to look at the Ukraine situation with how much money we have poured over there. And there's no accountability whatsoever. We don't know where all that money. Exactly. There's no receipt or check and balance to understand what that money is actually being used for. Exactly. And that brings up this bigger point of incentives. Unless we look at this from an incentive standpoint, I don't think there's any way to get away from the feeling of, wanting to support the underdog.
And there's just such a difference. To me, it's so sad that we would spend $100 billion sans an audit, right? No audit. There's really nowhere to tell where that money's going, like you said. Surely people are enriching themselves with that money. You have a depleted army over there in Ukraine where now they're drafting guys that are like in their late 40s, early 50s.
Even teenage girls now, I guess.
Yeah. And then here at home, if some legal immigrant is trying to make a living by driving Uber, the government needs to be in that guy's pocket. And that's just sad.
Mhm.
You know, when the Biden administration starts floating ideas like an unrealized gains tax, that's the end. We have reached the end of the road in terms of ideas. I wrote an article about this like a week or two ago, maybe a month ago, just saying that an unrealized gains tax would destroy the US economy. It would accelerate the destruction of our economy because all it would do is incentivize all of the job creators and the people that have all the wealth in this country, many of whom have already moved from California and New York to places like Florida and Texas. You put an unrealized gains tax in place, and the next step for those people is out of the country, and it won't fucking take long either, because those are the people that have the means. In a week, they can have their second passport and they can have their shit reincorporated in Mauritius or in fucking Isle of Man or in Ireland or wherever the tax haven of the day is. And first off, putting aside the fact that an unrealized gains tax is insanely burdensome and just completely a lunatic idea, it's like worse than modern monetary theory. I don't even know how to describe it. Putting that aside, you will see so much capital flight out of the country that, you know, and so all we're doing is just doubling down on worse ideas to try to accelerate the wrong solution to a problem that we appear to be past the point of no return on.
Mm.
And that's, like I said, that's sad. When you're talking about taxing unrealized gains and trying to make sure that you get your $30 from some cab driver, and we're just sending 50 billion to Zelensky and just trusting that it goes to the right place, or we're letting 320 million fucking float out into the Mediterranean after 12 days of doing nothing in Gaza. We have lost it completely. It's horrifying to think that we could make such irresponsible choices when it comes to, you know, this is not, Tom, if me and you got together and we had 2 weeks, we could find $250 billion in the budget somewhere, and we could do it in a way that when most people left their house, they wouldn't notice any difference. And so the addiction to spending that everybody in the country has, it's no different in government, and no one has the spine or the balls to make a consequential decision that will make any part of the electorate uncomfortable at any point, because everybody's so afraid of not getting reelected. And as long as all of that holds true, we are going to descend into chaos as a country. I wish I had better news for you.
Chris, you brought up the election earlier, and exactly on that point about descending into chaos. I wonder, you know, what are your thoughts around what the election holds, if we're even going to end up having an election, and what kind of craziness, mania, and polarization is going to happen going into this election?
Well, we'll definitely have an election. And I think, you know, the two big things up in the air still are Trump's vice president pick and who's going to replace Joe Biden. There's just no way that this guy makes it. I think they have to pull him. I hope they don't, because he'll get destroyed in the general election if they don't, I think. And so I hope they can reanimate his corpse long enough to get him to November 5th. But I don't know if they will. If I'm a Democrat, you have to know that most centrist Democrats right now would have a much better fighting chance against Trump. Even this guy, Dean Phillips, that was, one of the other Democratic candidates for a minute. I listen to him. He sounds like he makes sense. He's like in his late 40s. He's with it. He's well spoken, seems to be reasonable, seems to have a modicum of common sense. I think he would have a much better chance. But I think even if they do pull Biden, I think they're going to go with either idiot Hillary Clinton or airhead Kamala Harris. I think those might be the only two people that have a worse chance of beating Trump than Biden. The nation is over Hillary Clinton for sure. And the primary in 2020 seemed to confirm that the country detests Kamala Harris. I'm not sure she's done anything to change that over the last 4 years. She doesn't seem to, nothing she says indicates any intelligence at all from her. So I think that they will play the game if they're going to have to replace. So right now they're playing the game of, well, Joe Biden's the incumbent, so we can't swap him out. He's the incumbent. He deserves it. He deserves, whatever. So it's like, okay, so they're going to drag his ass up on the debate stage on Thursday, and they're going to, I guess, put him into the general election. Even if Biden somehow wins in November, there's no way he makes it another 4-year term. So the only question is, who are you voting for if you vote Democrat? So we will have an election. It'll be interesting to see who Trump's vice president pick is. Wrote an article about this the other day as well. I think he's going to go with somebody non-offensive like Doug Burgum or Marco Rubio, which I think are probably his worst bets. He's doing so well. I think that the prevailing wisdom is just don't fuck it up at this point. And like, that's like perfect for like a milquetoast guy like Doug Burgum, who's like, kind of this wonky, just normal, average, white guy. And with even a wonky name, Doug Burgum, he's going to be like Mike Pence. And I guess like if your goal is to not fuck up the works at all and to not have somebody that like overshadows Trump and just kind of follows along, Doug Burgum might be your guy. But I really think that the Republicans, look, I'm an Eagles fan, man. When the Eagles beat the Patriots in the Super Bowl in 2018, they did it because they stayed aggressive. They were aggressive all the way to the fourth quarter. Sometimes you can't play prevent defense. Sometimes you can't ease up at the end of the race if you're up, 20 lengths because you can blow it at the last minute. Deshaun Jackson running back the very last punt. You can't punt to Deshaun Jackson in 2018. You can't give him 1/1000th of a chance, of a percent of a chance, because every once in a while it'll happen. So I think what Trump should do is go with somebody like Byron Donalds or go with somebody like Tulsi Gabbard or Vivek Ramaswamy, who are all bring different things to the equation. I think Byron Donalds is a great public speaker. Obviously, he's a black man, so that would help Trump continue his inroads. He's having a lot of success with the black community right now. I think somebody like Tulsi Gabbard would be a great pick because I think abortion is going to be the main issue that the Democrats run on, women's reproductive freedom. And I think having a woman as a vice president would just be great for Trump. I happen to love Tulsi Gabbard. I think she makes a ton of sense. She's a veteran. She's well-spoken. She's already humiliated Kamala Harris once at that debate in 2020. That was like, I watched that weekly on YouTube. And she was a former Democrat. So I think she could kind of give inroads to the center of the aisle as well. And I think Vivek is I love him. I just think he's great. He's no bullshit, slices and dices the mainstream media and doesn't let himself get talked about. The only problem with Vivek is Trump might see him as like as too much. I think Vivek will be a great candidate on his own. But I think any one of those three would be a better choice than like Doug Burgum or Marco Rubio, or like Tim Scott. Again, he's a black man, might help get. But if you go with a black man, you gotta go with Byron Donalds, man. Byron Donalds is a little bit more fire to him, a little bit tougher. Scott is just kind of along for the ride. So that's what I think is going to happen in November. And I think there's going to be major consequences for this. I think no matter who gets in office, the market's going to crash, probably like the day after the election. That would not surprise me. I feel like all the macroeconomic data, the BLS data, the jobs data, the CPI, you see all the revisions that are happening to the macro data in the US, just feels like they're just trying to hold things up until the election. And then, once the election happens, then they can the dam can burst and the water can start pouring through. But if I had to guess why there's been so many drastic revisions to like the job report and things like that, I would say that they're just trying to save face before the election. So it's going to be a wild next couple months, dude, in the US. It really is. And I also see that Mr. Poliev in Canada is polling very well. That election is not until next year. Am I correct? You're Canadian?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think he would be great for Canada, man. He has humiliated and embarrassed Justin Trudeau on like a weekly basis. I see a new clip of him at the the House of Commons, where they fucking yell at each other. Yeah, there's just been some wonderful clips of Mr. Poliev. And I think this is this like populist kind of reversion back to, a little bit more conservative libertarian ways. You see it with Javier Milei, you see it with Giorgia Meloni, you see what's going on in France right now with Marine Le Pen. I think the world is kind of saying, let's just back off. We've been very progressive for a very long time, and we may have over-egged the pudding a little bit, if you know what I'm saying, on the progressive side. So I feel like this is people just looking around and gently tapping the brake. Well, let's just bring a little bit more, let's just fucking calm down. Maybe we don't need to be waving dildos in front of fifth graders. Just spitballing here. Just thinking off the top of my head, maybe I don't need a fucking book in the fourth grade library with the instructions on how to give blowjobs in it. Just spitball. When I was in fucking elementary school, they wouldn't let me take out a book on karate because it was too dangerous and it was above my reading level. I was in the first grade and I wanted to check out a book called, I'll never forget, Karate for Young People. It was called. You can look it up online from like the 80s. And my librarian at my elementary school wouldn't let me take it out. So I went home and I told my mother, who worked at a library, and my mom had to call the librarian. She was like, "What's up? Why can't he take this out? It's too dangerous and it's on a fifth grade reading level." Meanwhile, I was reading at like a fifth grade level anyways, not trying to like talk smack, but was doing all right. And they wouldn't let me take it out. Now, you want to go out in the library and just open the book. It's like cartoons of blowjobs. So, I don't know. Maybe somebody can tell me if karate for young people is still, that's considered like, like the fairy tale now. Like anybody can read that. I have no idea what's going on in the world, dude. I'm sorry.
Well, I totally understand your sentiment, Chris. And, at one point I was trying to get Poliev on my show. And one of the questions that I thought about a lot that I wanted to ask him was, how frustrating is it to ask a specific question of your opposition and ask it six different ways
and over and over and over again,
and not ever come even close to having it answered, not even come close to even recognizing the question in any way, shape, or form. It must be unbelievably frustrating.
Every single video I see of Poliev in the House of Commons trying to have a discussion with Trudeau goes something like Poliev saying, "What's the price of a house? What's the price of an average house right now in Toronto for Canadians? Or what do most Canadians pay for groceries, a week?" And sitting down, and then Trudeau standing up and going, "Well, we're proud to have tried to help most underprivileged Canadians get groceries and blah, 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 blah," and just avoid the question. Every single one. Poliev asked clear, pointed questions aimed at getting to who's at fault for whatever issue they're discussing, which is usually Trudeau's merry band of idiots. And he will get up and Trudeau will sit down And then he will sit down and Trudeau will get up and they will go back and forth and back and forth. And every time Polyev gets up, he'll ask the same question. And every time Trudeau gets up, he will offer up the same fucking, like, what do they call it? Red herring, where he just starts gaslighting, just starts talking about something completely different.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, that would drive me insane. I would last probably 15 seconds, Tom. And I'd be like, I don't know what the fuck's wrong with this guy. I'm out of here. And I would just leave. So kudos to Pierre on his patience.
Which is funny, as a Canadian, watching Canadian politics frustrates me to the point that I would much rather pay attention to the far more consequential US politics, because Canadian politics just frustrates me to no end. But, this brings up this bigger point that you also touched on earlier. It's this idea of the weaponization of the justice system against your political opponents, and this demonizing by the media of anybody that's across the aisle from you. We all have to remember, I think, that this power can be used just because it's convenient now. This power can also be used by your enemies at a time in the future, because you've already set the precedent for it.
For sure.
And I think that is something that everybody needs to remember, not only on the left, but also on the right.
For sure, yeah. Trump showed a lot of restraint in not going after Hillary Clinton once he was elected in 2016, right? I mean, all that like lock her up shit and all the stuff with the 30,000 emails that got deleted.
Mm-hmm.
And he showed a lot of restraint by not going after her. And actually, a lot of his supporters were disappointed. Of course, it was the right thing to do at the time. But yeah, I mean, and now I watched this morning, Trump's spokeswoman on CNN goes to say something to one of the women interviewing her about Jake Tapper and how he has in the past referred to Donald Trump as Adolf Hitler on more than one occasion. Whatever. They just cut her off. They just don't let her talk. They cut her microphone. It's going to be the same shit that we see on Thursday during the debate. They're just so they're so in the camp for Biden and for the left. It's and so I don't know. I hope that if Trump wins the election, he actually does take the higher ground and does not do what the Democrats have done, because I think the nation understands that they've done far more harm than good. I mean, most people that have a background in anything legal understand how frivolous the cases against Trump were. I mean, you're going to go after him for falsifying business records, for a perfectly legal NDA outside of the statute of limitations, which, by the way, like, she broke, signed this NDA, and then she went out there and started talking all this shit about, Trump, and like, it's just a fucking circus. And they're like, go after him on that, on some 34 counts bullshit, right? Because he wrote 34 checks. And then, when you have guys like Andrew Cuomo coming out and saying that it was nonsense, and you have Judge Judy, who is like, I don't think she's a Republican. I think she's a Democrat. She's a Manhattan judge, or was a Manhattan judge. She's been a judge or a practicing arbitrator or whatever she is on television for 50 years. To just come out and say that it's nonsense, I think, and Trump goes out and raises like $200 million in the 48 hours after that guilty verdict. It just shows you, like, people get it. And that's why I wrote an article called Lacking Finesse, Lacking Mindfulness. It's on my Substack. It's free to read. The point of the article was, like, the Democrats, they don't have any finesse. Like, I get it, okay? The point is that, like, Democrats don't have any finesse. Like, I get that there are some things about Donald Trump that they don't like. I get that many people find him to be a reprehensible human being. Completely get it. You're not going to catch me on a bus, even when I'm talking to fucking my buddies and I'm having locker room talk and whatever. You're not going to catch me saying, grab him by the ever. It's juvenile and it's stupid. It's, I say other dumb shit, but I would never say that. Mm-hmm. There's things about him that, look, I understand why people don't like him. I understand that people don't like that he didn't pay contractors when he was doing work in New York. I understand that, like, you know, he's let his businesses go bankrupt while he has enriched himself personally. I get it. I get all the arguments against him, but it doesn't justify just making, you know, like the ends don't just the means don't justify the ends, or vice versa. Like, you cannot go out and say that he has been colluding with Russia when it hasn't happened. You can't have 50 former intelligence agents come out and say that the Hunter Biden laptop, which I could have told you on day 2 that was his laptop just by looking at the photos. They're not doctored. You know what I mean? Like, that wasn't his, that was also Russian disinformation. You know, you can't just bash him every single day into a fucking bloody pulp. And then because you don't like the fact that he's running again, get him on some fucking trumped up bullshit. You know, Michael Rappaport's out there fucking saying it's bullshit. And he spent all 4 years of Trump's term just talking shit about Trump, because even he says, yeah, so you're going further and further left. And roping in anybody that's got a molecule of common sense in their brain is starting to think like, man, they're really fucking doing this guy dirty. And that's why he's winning the black vote too, because you have all these, you know, all the Democrats are up there telling everybody how racist they are and perpetually telling black people that they're victims. Black people are watching Trump endure a lot of the fucking rigged bullshit, you know, that many of them have endured. You know, and so, like, I mean, it's almost like, I don't even know how to describe it. It's like irony personified, you know, like, because you think, like, how many of Trump's, like, housing projects was he like the slumlord, and like how many, like, you know, how many lower socioeconomic developments did he knock down to, like, you know, to build casinos and shit like that? You know, he was that guy. But the Democrats have come like so full circle that so many people are watching him be so unfairly treated that they can't help but identify with him. They can't help but say, oh yeah, system fucking did us dirty too at one point for whatever, you know, they got me on fucking marijuana charges, or they, you know, I got fucking pulled over when I wasn't doing anything wrong or whatever. And so all the Democrats do is play this identity game. Meanwhile, you got a whole group of people that's identifying with Trump that on paper, they don't have anything in common with him. You know, he's a rich, white, old billionaire. And they're, you know, people living in North Philadelphia that I talk to that are fucking voting for Trump. So it's just crazy. It's almost like, you know, walking the walk says a lot more to people that have a brain in their head than going out there and lying to them. You know, like Joe Biden says to Charlemagne the God, if you have trouble figuring out whether you want to vote for me or not, you ain't black. And like, that just doesn't land. Now, I can't speak for black people or anybody else other than myself. I can't speak for any other race, religion, color, creed, sexual orientation other than what I am. So I'm not trying to speak for anybody else. But I can't help but think that if I was a person of color and somebody said that to me, I would be like, that's like the ultimate insult, you know, like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, if somebody said to me, like, dude, if you have trouble, you know, knowing whether or not you should vote for me, you know, you ain't from Philadelphia or you ain't white, you know, I'd be like, fuck you. You don't know anything about me, you know? And so then meanwhile, Charlemagne wants to argue that with Larry Elder. Okay. Conservative black man. So Larry Elder goes on to his show and Charlemagne says to him, hey, like, you know, you ever hear the term N-word wake up call? And Larry Elder's like, no. And Charlemagne says, well, that's, you know, when something occurs to remind you of, you know, what color your skin is or something. And Larry Elder, also a black man, says to Charlemagne, you know, Joe Biden sat right next to you and told you that you weren't black if you don't vote for him. He said that should have been a wake-up call to you. And I was like, he's right. You know, so again, I can only speak for myself, but it's funny because it feels like the whole identity politics thing, the whole like race hustle that the left is like surviving on, it's like being unveiled as just talk, as a hustle. I mean, that's what it is. It's a race hustle, really. And it's just the veil is coming off. And I think it's awesome. You see these guys on CNN just absolutely melting down because Trump is winning with Latinos. He's winning with, blacks. He won Miami-Dade County in 2020, which is typically a Democratic stronghold. So, and you have people like legal immigrants that are from South America, that are from all over, that are siding with Trump on the immigration issue. Mm-hmm. So you have legal immigrants here saying the illegal immigration's out of control.
Yeah, the ones that busted their ass and made all the qualifications.
Fuck right.
And then they see everybody else just walking across, right?
Exactly right. How fucking pissed would you be? Mm-hmm. How pissed would you be, man, if you waited in line? Who the hell was I talking to? Somebody, maybe it was Vitaly Katzenelson. I can't remember, but somebody was telling me, or maybe Jack Barujan was telling me his father, they're Armenian. His father took him 10 years to get citizenship, and it was like the proudest day of his life. Now, how would you feel if you were anybody and you went through the process legally and then you just saw people pouring over the border? Chinese people wearing Canada Goose jackets, walking across the Mexican border. What the hell is that? What is that? I don't know.
Chris, there's a lot of this that we're touching on here that seems like a distraction. It seems like a distraction from the problems that we're actually facing, whether that be the debt, whether that be, maybe looming recession, all of these different ideas. But, I listened to one of your recent podcasts where you were a guest, and you brought up this idea of inflation being, instead of being an abstract idea, being something that you can see, having some type of measure of inflation every day, or let's say once a week, that shows you how much of your purchasing power you're actually losing. And this can apply to our conversation on taxes and unrealized capital gains as well. There's another show I listen to frequently called Words and Numbers with another former guest of the show. And they bring up the idea that if you had to literally pay out your taxes out of the gross amount of your pay, that would completely change how you looked at taxation, how you looked at inflation, any of these things. And, obviously, we're kind of talking to this echo chamber of people that already understand these things. Right. And I mean, I'm sure you feel in the same way that I do, that this is an issue that we're trying to reach more people with, to show them and help them understand that these are the real boogeymen in the closet that we need to be thinking about and fighting.
While we're visualizing things, like how about just visualizing how many times a dollar gets taxed? That would be an interesting one, wouldn't it? Yeah. Just take a $1 bill and just watch it go through the plumbing of the economy, and just watch how many times the same dollar gets taxed. Mm-hmm. You pay tax on it when you pay it out to somebody, right? You're paying payroll tax, whatever. They go and buy something with it, right? And they pay sales tax. And then the person that's selling, a candy bar, that's their income. So it gets taxed again. It's just then they take it and they go and spend it. And it's just then it gets invested in the stock market, and then there's a capital gain, and then that gets taxed, or somebody uses it to buy a house and that appreciates and that gets taxed. Yeah, I think that if we had a visual representation of the osmosis of our purchasing power, because that's really what happens. If you kind of envision your purchasing power as it stands today as a vapor kind of just floating in the air, inflation and taxation you can kind of just see it kind of just floating away little by little, but we don't have indicators for that. So if you
what do you mean? The CPI is a perfect indicator of that, isn't it?
But even you don't have a real time one though. You know what I mean? If I look at my bank account and I have $100 in my account, and then tomorrow I go and I look and I have $100 in my account, it looks like I had $100 and I have $100 now, but the purchasing power of that is different. Maybe yesterday I had $100 in purchasing power, but then in the day prior's terms, the next day I have maybe $99.99 purchasing power. And then the day after that, I have $99.98 in purchasing power. And so I think that if, and I've called inflation the dark machinery that kind of whirs in the background at night when everybody's sleeping. It's this thing that works, and it's this ice cube that melts that nobody has to look at. It's your purchasing power kind of dissolving, and you can't see it. And nobody really talks about it. So it's just this thing that happens. I have a dollar in my pocket, yesterday, and I have the same dollar in my pocket today. Can buy less with the same dollar today than I could yesterday. Incrementally less, but still less. Mm-hmm. And there's no way for me to see that. So I just felt like, if there was some like giant, I envision in my head like one of those giant like LED boards. Like, you ever see those things where it's like how many days you have in your life left? Mm-hmm. And then like, so you look at like 80 years, and when you can visualize all the days of your life, it's supposed to make it clear to you exactly how short life is. So you're supposed to like get cracking and do the things that you want to do, the things on your bucket list, etc. And they sell these big boards that will post that up. So you can say, all right, look, I've only got this many days left. Like, I'm going to be dead soon. I've always wanted to play mini golf. That's what I'm going to do today. All right, fine. And I think if we did the same thing with purchasing power, if we saw our bank accounts in purchasing power instead of dollars, that would be an interesting experiment, wouldn't it? Because then the numbers would just kind of go down. There would be this attrition that's constantly eating away at our numbers. And then all of a sudden, everybody would notice. And inflation would no longer be, the whirring machinery in the darkness of night. It would be this thing that we're constantly racing against and need to get ahead of. Mm-hmm. And I think that would create a sense of urgency in people that is not there today. So I would love that. And if you have any ideas on how to make such a visual representation happen, I'd love to hear about them. But I don't know any other off the top of my head. My specialty is generally talking a bunch of shit and not actually doing anything to implement it. I'm more of a talker and prattling on person. I don't actually propose realistic solutions.
Well, that's why there's all kinds of different people in the world, so we can work together to
exactly. Talk to Luke Roman if you want an actual solution.
Yeah. But I mean, you have done the research and you've come to ideas about what these real solutions are. Obviously, we've talked a lot about gold in the past. We've talked, you've come to adopting Bitcoin and kind of changing your mind about that. There are real solutions that not necessarily solve these problems, but help mitigate your destruction of purchasing power by these issues, right?
Yeah, just tangible assets, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's tangible assets with a fixed supply. Mm-hmm. Real estate, commodities, gold, silver. I mean, that seems to be as close as I can get to, I mean, even equities, because I think in an inflationary environment, financial assets will continue to rise. But I feel like real estate, gold, and silver, and Bitcoin to a degree also, is where you have to be, because anything that's finite and fixed in supply is where you want to be. It's the only like safe room in the giant maze of inflation and taxation. You have to take that purchasing power that has been vaporized and is going via osmosis through the air and out the fucking vent and out the window. Mm-hmm. You have to take that purchasing power and you need to put it into some type of fixed supply lockbox. And that's what gold is. That's why I love gold. 5,000 years plus of, trust as an economic instrument. And, you have people saying, all right, well, Bitcoin, look, it's got a 13-year track record. To some degree, I like Bitcoin as well because I like it ideologically. I would have more exposure to gold than I would to Bitcoin personally. Bitcoin may wind up being the fastest horse in the race still for some time to come, but there's risk. There's a lot of risk with Bitcoin that I don't think is inherent with gold and silver. And I think that, at the end of the day, the fact that the central banks continue to buy gold, specifically a lot of the BRICS central banks now are stocking up and hoarding gold, that tells you everything you need to know, because they are the end all be all decision makers as it boils down to the global economy. So even if everything goes to shit, it's going to be a collective meeting of all of the global central banks that figures out whatever new system we proceed on. And without trying to analyze how that's going to happen and who's going to come out of it ahead and who's going to come out of it behind, the one thing that circles all of those squares together is the fact that all these central banks seem to agree on the fact that they want to hold gold in reserves. And so to me, that makes it very simple that, without having to do a lot of work, I feel like gold is a safe place to be. Gold miners to some degree also too. We've talked obviously about the fact that down the road, gold miners may wind up getting nationalized if we go back to some type of gold standard, but physical bullion, sure. I think that's one of the safest places you can be right now. If you don't want to try to put up the analysis of exactly how the whole thing is going to break, because there's a million different ways for it to break. The general consensus among people that are much smarter than I am, Michael Saylor and Peter Schiff and friggin' Luke Groman and Lynn Alden and George Gammon and all these people that I listen to, all the people on your show, the general consensus is everybody's got a different opinion. Some people think we're going to crash. Some people think we're going to hyperinflate. Some people think the market's going to get smoked. Some people think equities will be the only place to be. The one thing that everybody kind of seems to agree on is like gold will probably be all right. And so that's where I would want to be.
Mm-hmm. So, Chris, we've talked a lot about, some pretty depressing stuff today. And unfortunately, that seems to be, the theme of a lot of my conversations. But I wanted to get your take on how you get some perspective and not get mired down of just being endlessly depressed by all of this.
Well, I used to really get annoyed by all this stuff, and it used to make me very sad. And I actually did used to get depressed over it. There was a point in my life where you feel like you have to right all the world's wrongs, and you realize, you think, oh, you're the only person that notices that how deeply flawed everything is, and that's just not the case. That's just narcissism and idiocy and just having an ego and being a moron and being young. But now, I realize I'm 41, so I only have so much time left. And I realize that it's far more important to me to just have peace of mind and to be happy. I've done a lot of mental health work over the last 10 years on myself. Still work that continues to this day. Everybody's a work in progress. But the one thing that I'm certain of, that I want to make sure that I have no matter what the situation is a calm, mind and peace of mind. And so that is really incongruent with examining how the world works. Because, today, before we got on this podcast, I didn't do anything. I didn't read the news. I didn't look at the stock market. I told you, I went and got a burrito and I went and did laundry, listened to some music. And when I hang up with you, I'll do the same thing. I'll play some chess online and I'll just relax. And I won't think about it again for the rest of the day. When you do think about it, it is, to me, it's sad, and to try to figure out exactly how it's going to go down, I think is a fool's errand. So personally, without trying to be a therapist to people, what I've tried to do is just detach myself from, staying off the fucking web is a great way to do it. Staying off Twitter is a great way to do it. You get sucked in so easily. I notice that when I watch Instagram, when I go on Instagram, all the things that I want to avoid, things that I don't want to do, I don't want to go to the casino. I don't want to go out and have a drink. I don't want to, whatever it is. All those things pop up on my feed, and I was just looking at the thing the other day. I'm like, I don't fucking want to do this, why am I putting this stuff into my head? It's the same with Twitter. I put out a tweet yesterday. Okay. Justin Timberlake got arrested in Sag Harbor. And for DWI, it was the big story. I'm sure everybody knows. And I put out a tweet yesterday that said, speaking of Sag Harbor, I just went there for the first time a couple weeks ago. The Hamptons is not really my socioeconomic comfort zone, but I went to go visit a friend. And I took a day and went to Sag Harbor by myself. Not a town that I would live in. Too expensive. I have nothing in common with the people that live there, whatever. But found my way into a taco shop. And I had a great cauliflower Chipotle taco. I eat a lot of veggie tacos. I don't eat a lot of meat. It is what it is. One of the best ones I've ever had in my life. Now, I very rarely say things like, oh, you should go try this, you should do this, whatever. That's the best part about being a libertarian is. Leave me alone, let me do whatever the fuck I want to do, and I won't tell you what to do. I put a tweet out yesterday or 2 days ago that said, speaking of Sag Harbor, anybody that goes there should check out El Taco Bar and have a Chipotle cauliflower taco. They were that good that I feel like it's worthwhile mentioning. I eat a lot of veggie tacos, and this is like one of the best ones I've ever had. And within like 3 minutes, some fucking imbecile had posted underneath me, first off, let me explain something to you. You can't have a taco without meat, all right? It's not officially a taco unless you have meat. Second off, if you put meat in your taco, you'll instantly be full, whereas if you eat a veggie taco in 1 hour, you'll be hungry again. And I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, what are you talking about? You know, like first off, I just watched a real live Mexican just make this taco for me. And he called it a taco and it was on the menu under a section labeled tacos. All right. So don't tell me it's not a taco. I've been eating veggie tacos my whole life. Never had a fucking Mexican or a Venezuelan or a Guatemalan or a Honduran or, you know, a SoCal person come up to me and say, this isn't a taco because you don't have fucking carnitas in it. No one's ever said that to me my whole life. 41 years old. I've eaten 10 trillion veggie tacos. All right, so that's number one. Number two, who gives a fuck if I'm hungry again in an hour, which isn't the case. All right. Anybody that knows anything about fiber and fucking eating vegetables and eating raw whole foods knows that you stay fuller for longer. I'm not going to argue the merits of that with this dickhead. But the point is, like, I know when I'm hungry and I know when I'm not hungry. All right. And when I'm hungry, I'll eat. And when I'm not, I won't. And my suggestion to you, fucking 50-plus-year-old guy on the internet criticizing me about my taco tweet, is when you're hungry, eat. And when you're not, don't eat. And I make you a deal. I'll stay the fuck out of your life when it comes to telling you when you're full or hungry. And you do the same for me. So I instantly deleted it. And I was like, I got to get the fuck off Twitter. Like, what is this? I can't even make a taco recommendation. Now I'm getting some lecture from some fucking 50-year-old dweeb that's telling me that I'm not eating real tacos because there's no meat in it. I was like, this is insane. I got to get the fuck off Twitter. So I just close out. I'm like, I may never come back to Twitter again. Of course, I was back on in 6 hours. But the point is, how do I stay sane? I avoid people like that, which increasingly means avoiding people in general. There's like 6 people that I like that I routinely will have a beer with and call on the telephone. So I don't know if that's good advice, but stay off the internet and focus on things other than politics and finance. And that's what I'm trying to do. Swear to God, when I hang up, not going to go have an aneurysm and continue screaming somewhere. I will I'm going to go read a book or something peaceful. Does that answer your question?
I mean, it's a great point though, that, there's a lot of the things that we face on the internet and in the media in general that is meant to just distract you and get you pissed off. Okay.
All right. This is what the reply was. Sorry, I hate to do this to you. This is this is not relevant to anything we're talking about. Here's what it says. It
is entertaining and it makes a point.
It does make a point.
About the danger of social media.
This guy is fucking more insane than I am. This is what he wrote. He replied to me because the tweet is deleted, but the reply is still there. Dude, ... Veggie tacos, in quotes, are not, capital letters, real tacos, ! There has, capital letters, HAS, there has to be an animal protein and fat for it to be classified a, quote, true, capital T, lowercase RUE, quote, taco. I don't care how a veggie taco tastes, ellipses with an extra period on the end, 4 dots. Animal meat and fat keeps you satiated, is that how you pronounce it? Full, essentially, for hours while you are hungry an hour after a vegetarian meal. You are hungry an hour after a vegetarian meal. This guy is telling me via the internet when I get hungry. What? What are people doing? Stay off the internet, for fuck's sake.
Yeah. Well, again, exactly like you're saying, there's no reason why any stranger should be telling you when you're hungry or full or anything, or what you should be eating, whether that's veggie tacos or bugs, right?
What is going on in this person's life that he has the time to tweet that? What? I don't know. I don't know, man. That's why I like being a libertarian. You know, be trans and eat meat tacos. I'm down for it, man. I support whatever flag you want to wave. I really do. Just stay out of my way when I'm fucking walking down the sidewalk. That's it.
Totally. Well, Chris, on that happy note, is there anything that you would like to leave our listeners to think about, or to, maybe some advice you'd like to leave our listeners with?
No, but I will say that I complimented your beautiful bald head before we were recording, and I'll do it now on the air. And that I was wearing a hat before we started, but I took my hat off so that me and you could make a statement together as bald men that are beautiful looking, and that perhaps we could get Luke Groman on, and the three of us could, share tips about sunscreen and, types of razors and waxing and things like that. So no, that's it. My brain diarrhea can be found on my Substack. It's quoththeraven.substack.com. And you can sign up for free. And that's it.
Awesome. Chris, always a pleasure, man. Always a good
thanks,
fresh
dude.
breeze to change things up.
For sure, man. Love your podcasting. You know that. And love hearing from you. And you're the man. That's it, dude. The privilege to be on your podcast and talk to your listeners.
Feelings 100% mutual.
Talk to you later.
This podcast is for general informational purposes only. Nothing on this podcast should be taken as investment advice. Guests on this show are not compensated for their appearance. Listeners are urged to educate themselves and make their own decisions. Do not base any investment decisions on the information contained. To view our full disclaimer, please visit our website.